a well-known service type of type desktop server, and the URI for it is desktop capture, and we use single call. Single call means whenever a client connects, we will instantiate a new object to handle that connection. Desktop capture is used by the client to identify the resources that this server is providing. Desktop server is the object that we are allowing the client to connect to and have access to, and it is defined here. As usual, as we have seen before, we need to inherit the Marshall by ref object and also desktop interface. Inside here, we specify the methods. We implement the methods that we are providing to the client. So in this case here, the first method is hello method. So when the client calls the hello method, the client is supposed to also pass a string parameter. And normally it will be my name, for example. And then you will take that, create a file, and save inside the file called hello text, my name, hello followed by my name. The reason we do this is because later on we want to open this file, read the content, and set the text box property to the string here. And that will happen below. I will explain below. Next one is goodbye method, which is also advertised for the client's usage. And when the client calls the goodbye method, it won't provide any parameters. Instead, our server will just create a file called bye.txt and then write this string into this file and save it locally in the server. And finally, the third method that is available to the client is a send bitmap. When the client calls send bitmap, it will also pass the memory stream containing the desktop image of the client. And then our server will take that bitmap, will take that memory stream and create a bitmap out of it and use that bitmap to save it as a file desktop.jpg in the local file system in the server. Now you might be wondering, why are we saying text here? Why are we saying files? In the previous design for our RAD system, we did not save any file. Now the reason we are doing this is because the client cannot have direct access to the user interface of the server. So only the server has access to its own user interface. So that is why we need to save the data that the client sent, so that the server can open that data from the file and then set the text box to the string contained in those files. And also so that the server can open the picture, the desktop JPG that is saved locally, and then set the picture box to the desktop JPG file, because the client don't have direct access to our user interface. So the trick here is, since the client has no direct access to our user interface, all we need to do is save all the data that comes from the client, and then the server will open the data and set the picture as well as the text in the text box. That will happen when the buttons are clicked. So when the button hello is clicked, it will trigger the first callback function, the first event handler, button 1. And this button 1 will open the file. It will check whether the file exists, hello file. This hello file was saved when it was received when the client called this method. When the client called this hello method, a file was created to save the name that came from the client. And so now when the server button 1 is clicked, we are checking whether the file exists. So this is an indirect, ingenious way to allow our server to update its own user interface, since the client cannot do it. The client has no access to our user interface. So if the file exists, it will open the file and read the contents by using all these methods, and then it will set the text box to the string that is read from the file. The same thing for button 2. Button 1 is the buy, is the hello, and button 2 is the buy. So when button 2 is clicked, it will check whether the buy.txt file exists. Now this file would have been created over here if the client called this method earlier. If the client called this method earlier, then our server would have created this file and saved this string into that file. So when the server user now clicks on the button 2, which is your buy button, is checking whether the file exists. If it does, it will read the content, and the content will be simply the string that is saved in the file. It will then set textbox 1 text property to the string that it has read. Now the final button is button 3. Button 3 is your picture button, which is the picture of the client's desktop. So when button 3 is clicked, it will check whether the desktop JPEG file exists. If it exists, then it will set the picture box 1 image location to that file. Now this file JPEG, desktop JPG, will come from this function sendBitmap if the client called it earlier. The client will have sent its desktop image, and our server will have saved it locally as desktop JPG. So when the user on the command server clicks button 3, it just checks whether it exists, and if it does, you just set the image to the picture box 1. So this is how we solve the problem about updating the user interface from the data that has been sent by the client. So we save everything now, and we build our command server, and that concludes our section, the practical walkthrough for the command server. So thank you for watching.